Ever wondered what life was really like behind the Iron Curtain? And what kind of deal did Pepsi and the Soviet Union have back in 1972? Today, let's have a look at the fascinating world of the USSR, where propaganda, secrets, and resilience were a part of daily life. The citizens faced tough times and often faced scarcity in so many ways. Want to know more? Stay with me till the end, because you don't get to see this angle of the Soviet Union often. Now, without any more delay, let's begin. Poverty was a significant issue in the Soviet Union, despite the regime's emphasis on equality and social welfare. While the government aimed to eliminate poverty through centralized planning and state-provided services, the reality fell short for many citizens. Long queues and rationing were common, and consumer goods were often of poor quality or unavailable. The wages were low, and limited opportunities for economic advancement meant that many struggled to make ends meet. Housing was always a huge problem in the Soviet Union, and many people simply could not afford to buy or even rent a comfortable place. In the 1960s, surveys indicated that a quarter to a third of the urban working class lived below the poverty line, and in 1977, an article estimated that around 40% of the population was considered poor. However, the Soviets did try to conceal these numbers, and Joseph Stalin suppressed the publication of data by labeling it a negative social phenomenon. Picture this. You've got your own room, but you share a kitchen and bathroom with 20 other people. Sounds disturbing, right? But this way of living wasn't uncommon in big cities there. Built during the time of the Tsars, the communalkas were communal apartments where privacy was hard to find. These living spaces were a product of housing shortages in the Soviet Union after World War II. People would navigate a maze of narrow corridors, dodging laundry lines and nosy neighbors on their way to the shared facilities. Despite the lack of personal space, communalkas were hubs of company and gossip, where residents formed unlikely friendships and endured the trials of everyday life together. And half a century later, despite the high rents in cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg, some people still live in these communalka apartments out of necessity. The Still Yagi were a subculture of rebellious Soviet youth during the 1940s and 1950s, known for their love of Western fashion and music, which stood in stark contrast to the conservative Soviet norms of the time. The word Still Yagi translates to style hunters or hipsters, and they wore brightly colored, flamboyant clothes mimicking Western styles they admired in American films and magazines smuggled into the Soviet Union. Even their choice of music was jazz and rock and roll. The Still Yagi hung out in trendy spots like Gorky Park in Moscow, where they danced, socialized, and showed off their outfits. Their lifestyle and appearance drew criticism from the government and older generations, who viewed them as a threat to Soviet ideals. Despite this, the Still Yagi's bold defiance of conformity left a lasting impact on Soviet culture, symbolizing youthful resistance and the desire for self-expression. Living under one-party rule in the Soviet Union meant the Communist Party was in charge of everything. Imagine a world where one party makes all the decisions, controls the media, and decides what you learn in school. How suffocating! Elections were just a show, since only pre-approved candidates could run. Freedom of speech? Not so much. Expressing dissent could get you a visit from the KGB, the secret police, and possibly a one-way trip to a labor camp. Daily life involved constant propaganda praising the communist utopia, while in reality, people faced shortages of basic goods, long lines, and economic struggles. Yet, Soviet citizens adapted, finding creative ways to live within these restrictions and showing remarkable resilience despite the oppressive system. The food shortage in the Soviet Union largely stemmed from Joseph Stalin's policy of collectivism, which began in the late 1920s. Stalin forced millions of small, private farms to merge into large state-run farms called kolkhozes or sovkhozes. This was meant to boost agricultural productivity and support rapid industrialization. But guess what? It had the opposite effect. Farmers had little incentive to work hard because they didn't own the land or reap the benefits of their labor. Plus, the government seized much of the grain produced to export or support urban areas, leaving rural populations with insufficient food. The average citizen faced daily challenges in obtaining food and had to stand in long queues for hours and hours. Only Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan produced a surplus, while the most populous republic, Russia, depended on food imports to meet basic needs. An interesting thing in the Soviet Union was the classification of beer, or should I say, its misclassification. You see, beer was considered non-alcoholic beverage for a significant period. Due to a peculiar loophole in Soviet legislation, beer with an alcohol content below 10% was legally considered a foodstuff rather than an alcoholic drink until 2011. That's why it could be sold in places where the sale of alcohol was otherwise prohibited, such as workplaces, schools, and even playgrounds. The Zhigulevsko brand was sometimes the only beer on the market. It was also readily available to minors, contributing to its widespread consumption among young people. Enjoying the video so far? Wait till you hear about how the LGBT community was treated in the Soviet times. Before that and more, please take 2 seconds to help me out. Hit like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video so far. Each like and subscribe helps support this channel and keeps me motivated to keep making you valuable content. Thank you. During Joseph Stalin's rule in the Soviet Union, LGBT individuals faced a pretty rough time. He did not like homosexuality at all and tried his best to criminalize it. In 1933, Stalin's regime finally made homosexual acts illegal and punishable by imprisonment or exile to labor camps under Article 121. This law remained in effect until 1993, and the same year, declassified Soviet documents clearly revealed that Stalin personally demanded an introduction of an anti-gay law. Stalin's policies promoted a conservative and traditional view of family and considered anything other than that a threat to Soviet morality. LGBT individuals were targeted by state security agencies and faced surveillance and harassment, so much so that people had to remain hidden underground in fear of getting caught. During the Cold War tensions, Pepsi managed to carve out a surprising niche in the hearts and taste buds of Soviet citizens. Long before other major names like Coca-Cola and McDonald's came, in 1972, Pepsi struck a groundbreaking deal with the Soviet Union, becoming the first Western consumer product to be sold in the communist state. Pepsi's CEO saw a huge untapped market, and so Pepsi did become popular there. The CEO made a deal involving the exchange of Pepsi for the Soviet Union's Stolichnaya vodka, allowing the Soviet Union to generate much-needed hard currency through Pepsi sales. And you will be shocked to know that PepsiCo briefly owned Soviet warships and sold them for scrap to generate some revenue. By the time McDonald's and Coca-Cola entered the Soviet market in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Pepsi had already established itself as a beloved beverage. But that situation changed, and by 2020, Coca-Cola was the #1 ranked non-alcoholic beverage brand in Russia. During the 1960s, the Soviet Union began mass-producing consumer cars, like the Lada, which was introduced in 1970. It was affordable, easy to repair, and remained popular even after the Soviet period ended. But the problem was getting your hands on a car. Purchasing a car in the Soviet Union was a complex and challenging process. While the government aimed to provide universal access to transportation, the reality was far from easy. One of the main challenges was the long waiting list. Demand for cars far exceeded the supply, and this meant the wait times were several years long, sometimes even decades for popular models. The demand was so high that the resale value of a used car was well above the original purchase price. So, buying a car in the Soviet Union was a painstakingly long process and was reserved for the privileged few, who had the patience, resources, and connections to navigate the system. Certain things and groups were blacklisted or deemed enemy elements by the Soviet government and were highly censored, persecuted, and discriminated against. Heavy metal bands faced significant censorship and repression from the government. The genre's association with Western culture and themes of rebellion made it a target for authorities. Bands were often denied opportunities to perform publicly, record albums, or even exist officially. The songs often critiqued authority, explored taboo subjects, or clashed with state-approved narratives promoted by the Communist Party. For example, the band Iron Maiden's album was banned due to its perceived anti-religious themes. Similarly, Judas Priest's music was considered ideologically dangerous, leading to censorship and restrictions on their performances. These bands and two others, like Black Sabbath and Nazareth, were secretly blacklisted by the Soviets. Looking at all these aspects of life in the Soviet era, we can't help but say that it was surely a rough time for a huge population. What do you think of the life back then? Tell us down below in the comments section. Thanks for watching the video, folks. Now check out this video on the screen, and I'll see you there.